Welcome to another edition of the Voice of Palestine, Voice of the Palestinian People. It's July 23rd, 2014, and I'm your co-host, Hanna Qawas. This week we are interviewing Joe Catron, a U.S. International Solidarity Movement activist in Gaza, Palestine. He has been filing almost daily eyewitness reports of the carnage from the Israeli aggression and was one of the volunteers trying to protect Al-Wafa hospital last week. Previously, he also edited the Prisoners Diaries, Palestinian Voices from the Israeli Gulag, an anthology of accounts by detainees freed in the 2011 Prisoners Exchange. We reached him live in Gaza to talk with him about what he is seeing and experiencing. Good evening, Joe, and welcome to the Voice of Palestine.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
You know, could you tell us an overview of what happened the last, 16, 17 days now?
The last 16 and 17 days have been, very intense. A lot of it depends on the area of the Gaza Strip you're in and what's happening at the time. I live in one of the quieter regions of the Strip, and that's quiet in relative terms, of course. In the area there have been shelling and airstrikes, but along the coast, Israeli military operations have been much more limited than along the separation barrier where they've been concentrated until now. In some of the areas along the barrier, like Shujaiya and last night Khan Yunis, their operations have been on a par with the Nakba in terms of their attacks on Palestinian infrastructure and attempts to drive tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. Vast segments of the Gaza Strip have currently been turned into wastelands. I spent a great deal of time, in particular, in the Shujaiya neighborhood at Wafa hospital, as you mentioned, and returning to it in the past few days after the Israeli onslaught has transformed it into a kind of an apocalyptic landscape of fire and rubble, what I saw the AFP called a moonscape. That's been very strange. It's certainly something to go back into a place where you had spent time as a normal neighborhood. Even during an offensive, it was a place where people lived and worked. And now it's simply empty, except perhaps for a few survivors and considerably more bodies amidst the rubble.
Yeah. So there is really nothing sacred to this terrorist army of Israel.
No, and that's something they're making very clear this time, I think, even to a greater extent than in previous offenses. We've seen some incidents that simply don't make sense from the perspective of anyone who would be worried about world opinion. The other week, for example, the Israeli Navy shelled 4 young boys who were playing football on the beach, killing them. And this might not be a unique incident here, except they did it in front of the row of luxury hotels where nearly every foreign journalist in Gaza is staying. So this was something in full view of the international press corps, many of whom saw it. Some of them even provided first aid to other boys who weren't killed but survived the attack. And these kinds of incidents, I think, are certainly having an impact on some of the stories that are leaking out of Gaza, perhaps despite the efforts of editors elsewhere. Today, yesterday, after numerous previous attacks on mosques, Israel shelled Gaza's 1,607-year-old church, the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius, damaging headstones there. And this was a place a little bit to the east of Shujaiya, where people driven out of that neighborhood had taken refuge. So they're making it very clear this time how little they care for the rest of our opinions.
And what happened at Al-Wafa hospital? Did they bomb it or just a few,
Yes, it's been bombed several times. Eventually, Israeli shelling forced its evacuation at great risk to the patients. Fortunately, staff were able to remove them all without any casualties other than some minor injuries to the staff. The power had already been cut before the evacuation, so some of the staff got banged up and scratched while attempting to move people who were comatose. But there were no severe injuries or deaths, thankfully. Unfortunately, they were forced to abandon many of the supplies and equipment on which the patients rely, aggravating the already grave shortages which had existed there and across the health sector in Gaza. Those patients are now at the Sahaba Medical Complex, closer to the center of Gaza City, which I certainly can't call safe. Nowhere in Gaza is safer right now. But it's probably a little bit safer than its previous location in Shujaiya, which is simply the site of one of Israel's most significant massacres in recent history.
Yeah. Where is the International Red Cross from all that? We haven't heard them speak out against these atrocities. Actually, their last report I heard yesterday that they weren't even involved in, saving lives.
No, and many people here have been very unsatisfied with the Red Cross's performance during this Israeli offensive. I know that the night when Israel bombed Wafa hospital for the final time, it wasn't the final time. It was also bombed again today. I might say a few words about that. But when it was bombed, forcing its evacuation, he was livid about the role they were playing. All they were willing to do was phone in bomb threats on behalf of the Israelis. So we have a supposedly neutral international organization with offices in the middle of Gaza City, making bomb threats on behalf of Israel and not doing much else that anyone can determine. It's really a very odd situation that I don't fully understand.
Yeah, and they supposedly the holders of the Fort Geneva Convention, aren't they? The Red Cross.
That is what they say.
Yeah, it's really, irony, to see such a thing. And because what? Because the Western powers really are in bed with Israel, and they really complicit in these war crimes. We'll come back to
Certainly, and it's worth remembering that the ICRC's biggest funders by far are the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. So it doesn't take that much footwork to figure out how that will skew their approach in a situation like this, where I think it's clear which side their donors are aligned with.
It's like borrowing money from the IMF,
Absolutely.
Yeah, where they're...
And it's an apt comparison. I've come to think of the ICRC in a way like the IMF and the World Bank. In the IMF and the World Bank, the number of votes are allocated by funding. Countries actually buy their votes. And while that might not be how the ICRC officially works, I'm coming to think that in practice it's about the same.
Yeah. You witnessed what happened, the aftermath. I'm not sure if you were there when it happened, but the aftermath of the vicious attack on Shujaiya in Gaza. Could you tell us in some details? And I know I read the report. You witnessed the murder of the cold-blooded murder of Khalil Saleh, who was known as the young man with the green shirt. Could you tell us also about what happened there?
Certainly. On Sunday, a number of the foreign activists here had accompanied municipality of Gaza workers into Shujaiya. They were attempting to conduct rescue operations to basically sift through the rubble in the hopes of finding survivors, or perhaps more likely bodies. While we were there, a young man approached us and asked if we would accompany him to his family's home. He was trying to reach it to see if there were any survivors there. We agreed and went with him. As we walked with him, we were going south with a separation barrier to our east, with a row of buildings blocking between us and the barrier. As we passed an alley where there was a clear line of fire with the Israeli forces clustered on the barrier, there was an initial shot which missed everyone in our group but divided it. It hit the ground, and the 6 of us in total scattered. 3 of us went backwards behind the building we had just passed, and 2 of us went forward. And after some discussion, of what we should do, the young man wanted for our group for his small group of 3, which was ahead of us, and our group, which was a few, maybe 10 or 20 meters behind him, to come back together. So he stepped into the alley in the hopes of leading the other 2 in our direction. Almost as soon as he'd stepped into the alley, he was shot. The first shot hit him, and he fell down. While he was laying on the ground, he was shot an additional 2 times. And as you say, all of this is on video. And there's something of a story behind the video, too, a not terribly happy story. His family actually learned of his killing through the video when his cousin saw it on Twitter. He clicked on it to open it, and many of the family from Shujaiya had moved inland into a house closer to the center of Gaza City, so a number of people from an extended family were living together in a single house. And when he opened the video, the young man, Salem's father and mother, who were also in the room, recognized his voice. So they learned of their son's killing through this video. And it took a while to coordinate things and make contact. I understand that he'd actually seen it through my tweet of the video, so he was trying to get in touch with me, but I was asleep at the time. We were finally able to connect. And today I met both the cousin and his father, the father of Salem Shamli, the young man who was killed at Shifa Hospital, and was able to get a little more information from them. There were 2 of his cousins who are, I believe, still missing, and he'd been trying to reach the house to see if they were there.
Yeah, and also, could you describe to us the destruction that they wreaked on Shujaiya and Khan Yunis?
Well, I feel like it's one of those situations where the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is kind of true. There's really nothing I can say that will be as profound for your listeners as perhaps going on the internet and simply looking at pictures of it. I have not yet been to Khan Yunis since the Israeli onslaught there last night. I should make that clear. Shujaiya is simply apocalyptic. Fire and blocks of concrete everywhere, bombed out ambulances, demolished houses, no sign of human life except the occasional rescue workers. Some of them were finally able to make it into the area today. But it's essentially, it's been ethnically cleansed, I think is the only thing you can call it at this point. It's like the Nakba. The Israelis force as many people out as they possibly can through threats. Then when that doesn't work, they force the rest out with gunfire, shelling, and ultimately the destruction of their homes. It's very reminiscent of that.
Yeah, you said even they attacked ambulances, destroyed ambulances, and attacked medical aid workers.
Oh yes, there have been a number of attacks on ambulances here. While we were walking through one small section of Shujaiya alone, we saw 2 ambulances which had been destroyed by bombing. And I know there have been a great number beyond that of attacks, not only on ambulances, but other medical infrastructure. Wafa Hospital, of course, but also other hospitals and health clinics here. Israel is making it very clear in this offensive that there are really no targets they consider off limits. At this point, I can't think of many things in Gaza they would not be willing to hit. They've certainly proven a lot of my expectations wrong in terms of what red lines they were willing to cross.
Yeah, nothing is really sacred to them, and nothing is really stopping them from doing what they want, not even international law, not even...
Absolutely.
I just heard, before I ask you about the Wafa hospital, you said they bombed it again today or yesterday, but before I ask you about that, I just heard today that they bombed the main electric station. Do you have any information about that?
Not that much. To be perfectly honest with you, the power here has only come on a little while ago, so I'm still rushing to catch up on all the news of the day that I didn't personally experience. I understand that the power station here was damaged. Israel has, of course, damaged it previously during Operation Summer Rains in 2006. How extensive the damage was this time or what effects it will have on its operations, I can't tell you that yet.
Yeah, because it's shut down now. The news saying that they shut it down basically because of the bombardment. That's really, I mean, it's really collective punishment and nothing more, nothing less, to say about their vicious attacks and genocidal, if we might add. But can you tell us about the Wafa hospital? How many times they bombed it and what's the last time?
I can't tell you the number of times, I'm afraid. I've lost count. The most recent time was today when they shelled it more extensively than they had before. I've heard various reports about the kind of damage that was done and how salvageable the building is. Not having been there yet to see it for myself, I'm reluctant to say too much about that. And they put forth a number of spurious claims to justify this. The Israeli military has apparently claimed that it was some kind of a Hamas Islamic Jihad military command center. Well, I'll tell you that while I was there, I escorted a number of foreign journalists from nearly every major world news agency around the premises. I literally can't think offhand of one who didn't come at some point. Every one of them had full access to the facility. They were told to go anywhere they liked, asked any question they wanted of anyone who was not comatose. Not one was barred from 1 inch of the hospital, and not one has reported any military activity within it. If Israel is making these farcical claims, they should be easy for it to substantiate. Of course, it will not, because the claims are false. Within the last couple of hours, the International Solidarity Movement has put something up on its site debunking the Israeli claims. The Israeli military spokesman had posted an image claiming that that was Al-Wafa hospital with a red dot showing where an M75 rocket had been fired. Now, of course, this would prove nothing. Anyone with software can put a red dot on a map. But the interesting thing about this is that where they put the red dot was not even Al-Wafa hospital. It was somewhere else. Specifically, it was the Right to Life Society, which is a playground for children with Down syndrome. They may have bombed that as well. Unfortunately, I don't know. But they've bombed so many things here now, they seem unable to keep track with their farcical justifications for particular sites.
I want to ask you about the morale of the people there. You are among them, and what do they say about the also unconditional support of the U.S. and the Western powers, and what do they say about these puppet regimes in the Arab world?
Well, certainly there's a lot of criticism for the role of both Western and regional governments. Hardly any of them, of course, are doing anything close to what people here would like to see. And some of the actors who have been trying to insert themselves into this situation, such as Sisi in Egypt or John Kerry in the United States, are not getting perhaps quite the receptions they had hoped for, although I can't imagine what they would have expected. I mean, I'm sure I don't need to tell you or your listeners about the United States' role here. For John Kerry to think that anyone in Gaza will be interested in strategic advice from him is really a little bit both farcical and insulting. There's just not much I can say about that.
Considering the role of the U.S. in the continuous support all through history to Israeli aggression and war crimes, even it goes way before the 67 war, which is documented, and all of these are really part of what the U.S. did to suppress liberation movements in the Arab world. I mean, this is, like you said, it's a known history. But what's really maddening that the Arab regimes continue with their subservience to this power rather than challenging it, although they had the economic power to do it, like what happened in 73. And the only thing is we can say it's treason, and that includes also the Palestinian Authority. I don't know, you don't have to talk about that, but that's my opinion. I think it's really relieving the Israeli army from facing our people in the West Bank, and the Palestinian security forces are doing the job of these Israeli soldiers. So if instead of being busy in the West Bank, they are concentrating on Gaza. So in essence, they are participating in this attack on Gaza. And what the people in Gaza say about this role, really, because Abbas is known to everyone that he was the architect of the Egyptian initiative, and this initiative is not acceptable to any Palestinian, really.
No, I've heard very little enthusiasm for the Egyptian initiative here. None, in fact. There's people here certainly have not forgotten. It hasn't been very long. The last time Israel brokered a ceasefire between the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and Israel in 2012, Israel immediately began breaking it without pause, literally the next day, and ongoing for months. The Palestinian resistance held its fire for months. They didn't respond. They looked to Egypt to fulfill its duties as the guarantor of the truce, and Egypt did nothing.
Yeah.
Now Egypt wants to put itself forward as the guarantor of an inferior truce that's less acceptable to any Palestinian. Why would anyone possibly take this seriously? I mean, we've seen Egypt's performance, but they could start performing their duties as the guarantor of the 2012 ceasefire.
Yeah, and
at any time over the past 2 years or the past year and a half.
Yeah.
They didn't. Now suddenly they feel very strongly about it. No, this is not a serious thing. This is simply them making a power play in the attempt to strengthen some elements at the expense of others. That's clear, I think.
Yeah. And also it's worth noting that, you want to do ceasefire, you ask the other side. They never presented their plan to the resistance movement in Gaza. They just...
No, Hamas leaders have said that they saw it on the news. That was how they learned about this ceasefire, which supposedly would involve them.
Yeah. Hamas
it's
and all
really unbelievable.
All the other fighting groups in Gaza, not just Hamas,
Of course.
They knew about it from the news media, which is really ironic, and it shows that Egypt, backed by Saudi Arabia, are behind this aggression, really, rather than are supporting it, although they're paying lip service. But, this is for the Arab people to deal with, and we're hoping they will sooner than later, because they are our depth, and they are, as Palestinians, they are our depth, and they are our brothers and sisters who will come to the rescue, and again sooner or later. I want to just ask you to give us just for the last day or two, what's your experience as an international? I'm sure it's really a harrowing experience for you, and I understand, because it would be for anybody, really, any human being. But could you tell us about, what did you see the last day, and your feelings and your emotions, and how you cope with it?
Well, I'm never very good at talking about my feelings and emotions. And I think at this point, most of us are doing our best to put our feelings and emotions on standby until the end of the offensive. It would probably be not such a good idea to spend too much time thinking about them at this point. The last couple of days since Sunday have been a little quieter. We've been in areas like Saha today, where the church is located. I went to see the damage to the cemetery and visit some of the people who had taken shelter there. I think everyone who's been displaced from Shujaiya and taken shelter at the church is a Muslim, but of course the church has opened its doors to everyone in need who can reach it. And so that was certainly less intense than some of the other things we've done recently. For a couple of days recently, we've accompanied civil defense crews who are trying to reach areas where they were needed, mostly for fire services. We were with fire crews, not ambulances. Unfortunately, in that case, most of the civil defense crews weren't able to ultimately deploy to where they were needed because it was simply too dangerous. The places where fires are ongoing are also the places where Israeli shelling and gunfire and airstrikes are ongoing. And with Israel's long record of targeting rescue workers in general and civil defense in particular here, it's a risk that everyone agreed was not a good one to take at the time. So it simply varies a lot day by day. Sometimes I'm asked what a typical day for me is like here, and I can only say I don't have one. I have nothing like one, really.
There were lots of solidarity activities all across the world, including the Arab world, and I'm sure the people in Gaza are watching them. What's the reaction to those, and what's the reaction of the people also to what they see of the enemy, of the people who support the enemy, like these Western government and these Arab governments?
People here have generally been inspired by the solidarity activities elsewhere, I think. I've noticed on the internet, I see almost as many pictures of protests in Arab and Western cities being tweeted by my Palestinian friends in Gaza as by my friends elsewhere. So it's something that people here are watching and keeping track of carefully, and something that I think is doing a lot to strengthen the spirits.
So, there is also, it's important to talk about in spite of all this carnage, it's over 650 dead, murdered in cold blood, really, mostly civilians, and the figure, I think it's almost 140 children who died in this so far with this attack. But could you tell us how the people feeling? Are they, because the target of Israel is to put the wedge between the resistance and the people. Are they succeeding, and how the people reacting? We saw it on TV when they captured an Israeli soldier. They were celebrating all over Gaza. So back to my question: are they really putting a wedge, or the people are around the resistance? Because again, the resistance is from the people, aren't they?
Of course, and no, they're certainly not succeeding in that. I'm personally not convinced that they're actually attempting to divide the people from the resistance. I think a lot of what they've done recently is simply to inspire fear and terror in everybody, more than any strategic goal, more profound or eloquent than that. But to the extent that they are trying to divide them, they've absolutely failed. I mean, one thing I find it very hard to put in words about being in Gaza during an offensive, this is my second, is that it's the worst of times, of course, carnage, suffering, death. But in a strange way, it's also kind of the best of times. I mean, it's time when everyone in Gaza comes together and unites and is on the same page. And there's a feeling of commonality and solidarity like you rarely see at other times. So there's absolutely no chance that Israel will succeed in any attempts to divide the people from the resistance under these circumstances. If anything, they're doing more to drive everyone here together.
Yeah, and basically, if everybody is a target, everybody should carry a gun and resist. Basically, that's what the message they are giving to the people.
Yeah, why not?
I want to just try to ask you, what can people do support Gaza. There is lots of solidarity work, but in concrete way, do you have any suggestions for us in the West?
Well, there are a number of things to be done, both immediately and in the long term. Right now, of course, the flood of international protests against Israel's onslaught here has been overwhelming. I was trying to keep track of the protests taking place in my country, the United States alone. Ultimately, I failed. There are just more going on than I can possibly follow. And I know the same thing is going on elsewhere in the world as well. So that's very good. And it is doing a lot to pressure our governments and other governments. I don't think John Kerry would be yelling as loudly for a ceasefire, however farcical his ceasefire proposal is, if he didn't realize that his government was shedding political capital over Israel's crimes here.
That's true.
And beyond that, it's not at all clear how long this offensive is going to last. There's no clear resolution in sight. So it's important to have a framework and beyond that, Israel's crimes against all of Palestine are ongoing and continuous for 65 years. I don't need to tell you or your listeners that. So it's important to have a framework for long-term solidarity in place. There are a number of things going on. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has many campaigns people can quickly and easily join. There are other efforts in solidarity with prisoners or specific sectors of Palestinian society. There's really a very broad array of approaches people can take, and they're all building up to something important, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's really crucial at this time to intensify the BDS campaign against Israeli war crimes. I just also want to try to get your opinion of, I'm sure you following the corporate media, especially in the U.S. It seems really the silence is deafening there about Israeli atrocities. What do you think?
I agree. I know you disagree with me on this, but I see some signs of the coverage improving a little. I think that has a lot to do with Israel this time around going all out and not worrying too much about the consequences, it seems. And something that's become very clear during this round has been how carefully managed and scripted all of it is. I mean, we've seen journalists withdrawn from both the Gaza Strip by NBC and territory claimed by Israel, that was CNN, because their coverage of the events here was displeasing to their management because they were simply too frank and too
objective,
perhaps a little too honest. Ayman from NBC, who was pulled out of Gaza, happened to be playing football with the 4 children who were massacred on the beach, and his coverage about that, let's say, didn't make his bosses very happy initially, and he was pulled out. But there was such an uproar over that they were forced to send him back. He's here now, actually. I met with him yesterday about the incident in Shajaiha. So it's becoming clear to everyone how much effort goes into keeping a certain narrative in the media. And incidents like that are also making more people aware of it, I think. Yeah, that's a really good sign, and I think it's due to the resistance that's going on, because in 67, and many people said that in 67 they finished all the Arab armies in 6 hours, not 6 days really, while now it is the 17th day and the resistance still fighting back and resisting this the 5th strongest army in the world, which is a good sign, and shows that the resilience of the Palestinian people and their determination to end the siege, because that's really the siege since 2006, 8 years ago, killed more Palestinians than any attack on Gaza by the Israeli fascists, really. Absolutely, and that's one of the most important things to remember in all this talk of a ceasefire, that the ceasefires being put forward by Egypt and the United States simply mean a return to a status quo in which Israel besieges Palestinians in Gaza and fires on them at will, killing and maiming them while impoverishing the entire population. Yeah. And Palestinians do not offer any fire in return. It's objectively a very one-sided ceasefire.
Yeah. We thank you really, Joe. We don't want to take more time of your precious time, really, and we salute you, salute all the international solidarity activists in Gaza, and especially we salute our the steadfastness of our people in Gaza. And thank you again, and it was a pleasure, and we talking to you, and we hope to stay in touch.
1 minute.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Have a good night. Yeah.
You too.
Bye.
And that was Hana Kawas talking live from Gaza with Joe Catron, a U.S. international solidarity activist. And with that, we conclude another edition of the Voice of Palestine. Please check out our website, voiceofpalestine.ca, where we have archives of all our shows for over 10 years. Thanks for tuning in. Palestine will be free.